Hi, friends. I am Marie Woods, founder of Life Above Foundation, your host, a professional counselor, family and marriage therapist, and a wholeness life coach. Welcome to Relationship Real Talk, the podcast where we dive deep and tackle the toughest relationship challenges Christians face today. Are you tired of struggling with unforgiveness, past wounds, and conflicts? Feeling lonely or having trouble communicating? Wrestling with trust issues or trying to balance your faith with your relationship goals? Feeling stuck and stagnant in your relationship? You are in the right place. Here at the Relationship Real Talk, we get real and cover a wide range of topics, including relationship anxiety, trauma bonds, infidelity, estrangement, toxic dynamics, dating after divorce, and how to heal from relationship trauma and grow and build healthy and lasting relationships. We're not just about identifying the problems. We're all about finding real, integrated solutions from multiple disciplines and offering professional help from different fields to mend and strengthen your relationships. So, let's get started on this journey together, one honest, heartfelt conversation at a time. Today, I have Doug Scott. He's going to speak to us in the second section again. So Doug, he is a licensed clinical social worker. He works as a mental health counselor in pastoral counseling in Dallas for 23 years. Today, we're going to do the second section. The conversation will be around the Trinity and the human experience. Doug, his whole theme, the topic is about made in the image of God, growing in the likeness of God. What a wonderful topic and a big topic as well. And some of you have listened to him. For some of you, if this is your first time, I would highly encourage you to go back to listen to the part one. He spoke on being is becoming, why the Trinity is the template of all reality. Such a fundamental, important topic. So highly recommend you to listen to it. So Doug, welcome to our second section today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure. And what I wanted to do is build upon our last conversation. Again, I invite the two of us just to have a dialogue as well. So as I do some of my presentation and just talk, please feel free to jump in and we'll make this meaningful for your life in terms of like what you might bring from your experience of being a spiritual director and counselor and that kind of thing. And but I want to circle back a little bit and just provide a quick summary of the first talk for those who may not have caught that one.
Yeah,
And
sure.
that is we're kind of starting to think that if we could picture that there is a cosmic law, the primary cosmic law might be this. It might be the cosmic law of the mystery of union and unity of all things. The law of one, that there's one universal reality. If you're familiar with the work of Richard Rohr, his understanding of the universal Christ, and of course, it's not his understanding. He's interpreting, but he's standing upon the shoulders of, well, the Christian tradition, to be honest. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this union and unity, the law of one. But the way that this mystery of union and unity that holds it all together, this big net, the way this reality, this divine reality, experiences joy, experiences all of the ways that infinity can experience itself infinitely. If infinity, God is infinite, and God wants to experience God's self, then God does so through infinite variety. And in order for God to have infinite variety, there has to be some kind of cosmic law of of evolving. I'm not saying God evolves in the sense that we might say humans have evolved or anything like that. What I'm trying to say is that God's own sense of delight and joy uh, is constantly intensifying as God is living in and through everything that's created.
Mm.
See, we are
That's
spiritual
beautifully
beings
described.
trying to have a human experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and so what I'd like to offer here is that the law of three is the law that allows this becoming to happen.
Mhm.
And evolution only happens when when there are three forces that come together. There's an affirming force, there's a denying force, or what sometimes I like to call it the contrasting force.
Mhm.
It creates a contrast, um, tension. Tension is not a bad thing. And then there's a reconciling force that is often hidden. And we're going to talk about those seeds that are planted right at the ground of that contrast. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And that's the reconciling force. And when we can cultivate, when we can learn to have eyes towards the ground of the crucifixions of our life, the crosses of our life, when we can learn to have eyes to see the seeds here, that's the reconciling force. And we can plant those, or we can grow those seeds so they grow up. Could be quickly, or could be, take longer, but grow up and actually bring us to a new reality that is ultimately very satisfying. It's something bigger than you would have ever imagined if you tried to manufacture it yourself.
Mhm.
Like, for
Yes.
example, if I have a problem, but I don't have faith, and I just go and try to solve this problem without really thinking about it, I might not actually arrive at a very satisfying answer that would ultimately be satisfying. But
Mm.
let's say if I have a problem, like maybe I don't know what to do with my life, I've reached a crossroads, who am I? And instead of immediately um, diving into something else, if I talk to people, be vulnerable, seek counseling, allow a little bit of time to pass, assuming I can, then maybe I meet people that then all of a sudden invite me into something new that I wouldn't have guessed. And then that launches me into a new trajectory that I wouldn't have planned, but it's ultimately exactly what I want. So that's the law of the reconciling force.
Mm. Well, there's from what you were saying, it sounds like so much, so rich, so much content in it, just by what you were just, describing. And the seeds I remember in the gospel, Jesus said, if one seed fall into the ground, if not dies, it won't come up and sprout and become a plant, bear fruit, unless the seeds died under the ground. Right.
You've brought it up perfectly, because that is usually the gospel story that talks about, that really talks about the law of three, because you can have a seed that falls. So you have the affirming force that's falling down,
Mhm.
and then the denying force is the ground. So it's denying, it's creating a contrast of gravity, so it hits the ground, and let's assume that the seed gets buried,
Mhm.
but just if the seed is buried um, and watered, let's say it gets water and it's buried, it's still not going to grow unless sunlight happens.
Mm.
See, so sunlight could be this reconciling force, light. And when the sunlight grows, the seed has to actually die to itself. It has to die to its seedness, which is a kind of death.
Mhm.
But from that death, it grows up, and the sun allows a transformation to happen. So what was a seed becomes a new sprout or even a tree. And that's that evolution, the the affirming force of falling and then getting buried, the denying force of that stops the falling,
Mhm.
and then the light coming up and shining allows this new reality to come up.
New reality, spirituality. I'm reminded it's the whole process of salvation, from dying on the cross and then being buried and, take
Yes.
through the dark night of soul and then go through the death process, the new resurrected life come out of that death and, bear the new fruits or new reality.
Well said. Again, um, one of the things that I love about what you're saying here is Jesus came to reveal everything, reveal how God has been working since the history of the universe. There's a multiverse in the history of the multiverse, that everything is on this path of dying, and then liminal space and then rising, dying in liminal space and then rising. And I think our jobs, honestly, if I could just put it very in Christian terms, uh, our jobs as counselors, as good friends, as spiritual directors, our jobs sometimes are to help people to recognize that they've actually been on the cross for a long time. They're just not aware of it. Sometimes it's like, we're all supposed to carry our crosses and die on them, but God never asked you to be on there for 30 years.
Right? Right? Yeah, go through the process. Something, you're right. People feel stuck, or sometimes a relationship you feel like a stagnant. It's not a
Mm,
moving forward. It's something that we have to go through that cease to die in order to produce something new. But if we are in the denial mode, or
that's right.
we don't allow God to do His work, then we feel stuck. And that's what you're saying, hang on the cross for 20, 30
But you
decades.
don't even know you're on the cross.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. And here's the thing, in the gospel where Jesus says, um, all sins can be forgiven except for the sins against the spirit.
Mhm.
That's puzzled a lot of people. Not, I'm sure that there's really good answers for this, but the one that I like and seem to make a lot of sense to me is the reason why the sin against the spirit cannot be forgiven is because when one is sinning against the spirit, or rather, when one is unaware that they've been on the cross, then there's no, that one is not even asking to be forgiven because there's no recognition of being on the cross yet. That's why I can't be forgiven, because there's no, oh wow, this has been a problem and I need to ask for forgiveness. You see?
That's the conscious awareness. And also, I'm reminded, Doug, what you were talking about at first, the part first section, the three forces.
Mm-hmm.
And when we go against the life force, as you were talking about the spirit, I very much feel it's like a life force. If we go against that life force and we feel stuck and we suffer.
That's right. Yeah, but I think going against a life force intentionally is different than going against the life force uh in without knowing it. And going against the life force without knowing it would be kind of equivalent. Now humans can do this. Nobody else, no other living creature can do this because we have this free will thing, but it would be equivalent of, let's say if I were a seed, I fall into fertile ground, get buried, have water, have the sun, everything is perfect for me to go up and sprout, and I'm like, I'm not dying to my seed form in order for me to grow. I'm just going to stay right here. And then that tension of staying just increases. But my stubbornness to not recognize that I have to say yes to this process.
So good. Well said. Well
Yeah.
said. Yeah.
So just to circle back, the when we talked about last time, the law of three we arrive at some part of God. The nature of God is the very act of bringing order into from chaos, that the focusing of consciousness, this that God, let me say it this way, the power behind the law of three is that there's always going to be some level of chaos, and then an ordering that starts to happen, a focusing. So for example, if you see a bath full of water and then you're ready to pull up the plug, when you pull up the plug, there's not an immediate drain. There might be 2 or 3 seconds while kind of the water figures out, oh my God, there's gravity, and then it starts to fall. Mm-hmm. And then as it's falling, there is a focusing that starts to happen, a funnel that starts to happen. Mm-hmm. God is that power that creates that funnel in everything. So when you and I are unaware of things and all of a sudden we become aware of a contrast in our life, God's very nature in us, it's God's nature in us, mm-hmm. it starts to feel an awareness forming of a contrast that's happening in our life. That is God, like the chaos of denial, mm-hmm. the contrast becoming more and more evident in our life. Mm-hmm. Then that very beginning of that focusing, that's God's nature in us, because that is one of the principles of God the Father. God the Son, I mean, again, I'm using these not in terms of saying God is masculine, I'm just using the traditional terms here, would be this creative principle. Once you start to focus, there's always a desire, always. The human being cannot resist this. Every human being cannot resist this. No human being can resist this. In fact, no creation in any kind of manifestation can resist this, and that is to create. Mm-hmm. We have inside of us, every one of us, a desire to transcend ourselves and express ourselves. It's the very nature of God at the most transcendent divine level. That is God's very nature. It's focusing and creative, period. And we are God's expression, God's act of creativity, the word, that's us. That's all of creation. And as fractals of, we are fractals, we are holons, we are parts that are inside the whole, but we are also the whole itself. So what is true for you, what is true for me, what is true for Christ, what is true for your cat behind you, it's going to have to be true for all reality. Otherwise, it's not true. Mm-hmm. So there's always going to be this sense of learning, focusing, and then desiring to create. So I'll ask you a question just to kind of hammer home this idea is, when was the last time maybe in your life where you had an idea in your head like, man, I'd really love to, well, let's take this podcast. I mean, how long has this been in seed form? And then it's like, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And then, so tell me about that process real quick.
So, okay, about the podcast, actually, the ideas, because as a Life Foundation organization, we do like an annual mental health conference and provided for the faith community global wise. So this year I've been preparing and praying for God's, gave me this inspiration, whatever words. What should I do this year? So we have focused on mental health care. We have focused on soul care, spiritual growth. So this year, clearly to me, is the word relationship. Mm-hmm. So as I was preparing and have a conversation with our speakers, and I was like, yeah, everybody have their expertise. Everybody have their, something to share, their life stories. What about we start something conversation before we go into the conference? Because lots of content, people love those talks, but sometimes I feel people need to take time to process, to connect with speakers like you yourself, to mm-hmm. get to know you, understand your content, your background, everything. Mm-hmm. So the podcast just it's like a byproduct. It's just you give a birth to the thoughts, out of that big seeds God gave to me. So I don't know if that makes sense. And
It does. So, but I want to break it down. You first had a desire to add your particular energy into this overall project.
yes,
Okay, so there's that creative principle. But before even the creative principle manifested itself through you, you were working with this larger group. Yeah.
let me
And
back up a little bit,
yeah,
Doug. When
sure.
first year I started this, even the creative thought, the idea about to do this global wide online conference for mental health care. I remember we had a board meeting, and Troy, he's our mutual friend,
Yeah.
right? He walked in, he looked at me. The first word he said, "So this is your first baby, huh?"
And how right that is.
Yeah.
And so you, let's say before you even had this idea, there was the, you weren't aware yet, way before. And then whatever happened in your life, you become the chaos of denial or being in darkness, if you will, starts to through our own suffering and our own joys, it starts to bring this focusing of awareness, this funnel of awareness. And then you become conscious about, oh, I would like to do something in the world, bring people together. You start to have these ideas that start to intensify, polarize into some kind of level where you enact them. You do things to actually create and incarnate them in the world.
Yes.
And so and you can't say no to this, because this is God's internal divine life living in and through you. You cannot say no.
Doug, and let me tell you, it's so true. When there's a force, there's a reconcile creative force inside of me, I just cannot hold it anymore until I share with my peer, friends. Guess
Mm,
what? They responded. Everyone, people I contacted, they
mm,
responded right away. I mean,
yeah,
it's like something is working inside of them. When I give
yeah,
a voice, they immediately responded.
yeah. See, and so God has been working in them too. And then there's a creative, because whenever there's the creative principle, and
Mhm.
this will launch us into what we're going to be talking about today, is whenever there's the creative principle that happens inside of you and happens inside of me, it happens inside of the collective. Remember, we're all one body.
Mhm.
Yeah. uh if you can imagine, again, we have the perpendicular line. So we have the affirming force, the contrasting force. So it kind of forms almost like a 90-degree angle for those who are listening to us here. And now imagine that the reconciling force is a force that grows and grows in the middle. It's almost like a 45-degree angle from the perpendicular. So it like grows outward at a 45-degree angle, and it grows in strength. It's like a Coke bottle you shake up, and it gets stronger and stronger inside, and eventually it has to burst
Mhm.
open. But what happens is that right there, when you start to have this perpendicular piece, affirming force and contrasting force meet, and the awareness is like zero, you still don't know yet. Uh, then it grows real quick when you feel the attention. Sometimes I have to help people just my intervention is I want you just to feel the conflicts or tensions inside of you this week,
Mhm.
because that's getting them in touch with the affirming and the denying force inside of them.
Mhm.
Um, and what happens though, as soon as we become aware of something, even
Mhm.
at level one, uh, immediately at the very end of the whole process, something starts to form that's exactly the what level one, like awareness would be when consciousness is completely ready to go. So in other words, what I'm trying to say here is to bring it back to the human level. You probably had this idea of, I want to create some kind of global conference to help people. You're thinking about it, it's welling up inside you. And right when you became aware that this was what the world needed and you were good at it and you wanted to do it, there was a part of you, and it was a distant future. You didn't know how far away it was. And it's really none of your business to figure out exactly what it was going to look like, because that's God's thing. But you had an idea, and there was that somehow it's going to come to some level of consummation, some level of a new complexity that would change the world in whatever way that you are called to steward.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts to form immediately when you begin to feel this contrast. It starts to form, and that's called the subjective aim. That's called the orientation. That is our North Star, our polar North Star. And so we then learn about awareness. It moves into consciousness. We want to do something about it. We call people, you get people, they're saying yes. And all of a sudden, you're starting to have these board meetings. Troy walks in, says, hey, this is your new baby. Like in that moment, you realized that that was the consummation of a seed form that started however long before. How does this sit right with you? Does that feel right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. This idea has been, the seeds buried in the ground for a long, long time, but needs all the environments, created my own experience and under the ground, the death experience, my own, life experiences, like
Yeah.
you mentioned about. And God utilized my life experiences and utilize the circumstances and generates this creative idea inside of me. And it's like an oven that been cooking to the day I gave a new birth to the
That's
idea.
it.
Yeah.
And then new births grow up. And if we're doing our job right,
Mm-hmm.
what was the new room of our life? So we have an old room. I'm going to say the law of three in a slightly different way. We have an old room, which is status quo,
Mm-hmm.
and then we get thrust out of our old room. Maybe a relationship ends, maybe someone passes away, maybe we lose our job, or maybe it's something more voluntary. Maybe it's like, well, I really want to eat better. Dang it, that means I can't have my chips at 9 p.m. anymore. But regardless, we get thrust out of our old room, out of the Garden of Eden of our life. But before we go into the new room, we have to pass what's called the liminal space. The liminal space. And that liminal space uh, feels like a darkness. We call this the dark night of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'd like to invite you and I to think about, it's actually not dark at all. It's actually so bright with light, so bright with possibility, so pregnant with the plenum, with abundance, uh, that our eyes, our bodies can't take that power. So it's as if you and I are living our life in a dark room, and then someone comes and flips on the light real quick, and you shield your eyes because it hurts. It's too bright.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's like to be thrust in to liminal space, because all of a sudden, whatever we knew and made sense of life before doesn't make sense anymore.
Right.
But yet we don't know what it looks like to live into where things make sense again. And so we feel like we're crawling, and that's our experience. But the truth is that everything is so infinitely ready to be manifested. It's just a lot. We need to awaken. We need to adjust our eyes to this darkness. And then we realize that God was there in God's plenum in the darkness always. But what is required of us when we're in our liminal space is to state, and I say to my clients, state out loud, what are your goals? What do you like? If you want to feel better, you don't want to be as depressed, great. In order to do what? You don't
Mm,
want to be as anxious. You want to decrease your anxious. Awesome. In order to do what?
mm,
Uh, you want a better job that's more satisfying. Awesome. In order to do what? And the reason why I'm asking this is because when you and I can frame our meta goal, the big goal, um, it could be something like make me an instrument of your peace. My own prayer every morning when I wake up, the first thing I do, I sit up, put my arms out like this as an offering, and I say, Divine Creator, I give you all of myself, my full mind, my body, my spirit, all of myself for you. Help me to be an instrument of your peace for all those I meet today for their highest and greatest good, including myself. Amen. And that right there is the meta massive goal, so that any prayers that I say during the day are going to be oriented by this massive meta orientation.
mm. So good. So good. In another word, like we have to, the Bible says renew our mind, being transformed in the likeness of God. So you put yourself in the big concept is that I am willing to put myself in the big flow of God's plan on earth. His big plan, small plan for individual and collectively. But you put yourself, you surrender yourself under God's will, under God's plan, right? And
Yeah,
that's
because
the
it's
big
already
part of
there.
the day.
It's already there. God is already working inside of me.
Mhm.
But the thing that's required of me is what I call my Mary's yes.
Yes.
We talk about Mary's yes last time. I can't remember if we had mentioned it.
We mentioned about Mary, yeah. Mentioned about Mary. Yeah,
Yeah,
her
yeah.
willingness.
Mary's yes. This idea of Gabriel saying, "Do you want to birth wholeness? Birth
Right.
Christ."
Yeah.
You have to say yes.
Yeah.
Otherwise, God's going to respect that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
So here's what I want to invite us now to move into is how can we as people that are on the journey ourselves, but also uh, giving care and love to people that are given to us to serve, whether we are counselors, friends, coaches, spiritual directors. I think it would be good to kind of talk a little bit about what are some major issues that every human being faces. Here I'm going to be borrowing from Brene Brown and other thinkers. And then I want to talk about how we can help people recognize their own law of three patterns in their life, their own crucifixions, so that they can learn to then go into that liminal space, the the tomb living,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then rising in the resurrections of their life.
Mm-hmm.
Always with the scars, though, just because we have a higher way of understanding things when we emerge from the tomb and we're resurrected, we keep the scars because that keeps us grounded and humble. Yeah. So we'll get there. But I want to, do you mind if I share my screen at this point?
Yes, please.
Okay. Now, what I'm about to share with you is um, not necessarily, this is something that I've come up with. So I'm not saying it's going to be perfectly appropriate for psychotherapy, but it might be. This is what I come up with, and it makes sense to me. After 23 years of counseling and my own experiences, especially when I work with men, what I find is men, and I would say the Western world in general, we're very comfortable with anger. We can express anger. We know when we're angry. Now, we may express it aggressively, we may express it passive aggressively, but anger is sort of culturally sanctioned in a way. But as you know, with your own studies, uh, anger is only a top layer, huh? And so what I've been interested in is trying to map in some ways what might be layers that we can rely on that they're there, layers that are below anger. And so here's the following is kind of what I've come up with. The first thing that we take as an assumption in this model is that God is the mystery of universal union and unity. So I just want to say that God is always there. God is in us. God is through us. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. We're made in the image of God, like we talked about last time. Yeah. And there is this interesting thing that I call it's not just me, others might say this too, the veil of forgetting. The veil of forgetting. That there's a veil that seems to be drawn between our conscious mind and our unconscious. Maybe at the very depths of our unconscious mind, we have a deep memory of being one with God, kind of like a deep embedded memory that's not conscious of being one with our mothers. This union that can never be taken away, but then when we don't access it or pursue it in our life, it becomes almost like an irritant, like an itch on the back of your back that you can't ever scratch until you know it's there. So this mystery of union and unity is our nature, but we have this veil of forgetting that we are in union with each other, that we are in union with the Creator. And this veil is very important because it allows us, it's a gift, feels like a curse, but it's actually a gift because it is the very thing that allows you and I, and therefore God through you and I, to learn about the nature of love choosing to unite. Love is the energy that individuates, and love is the energy that unites. And so we have to, love is that which says, get out of the garden, get out of your status quo, your old room. Love pushes you out, and then love brings you back together. But the bringing back together is always our decision to say, yes, I want to be brought back together. And in order for that to happen, there has to be free will. And in order for free will to exist, there has to be a sense. I can call it an illusion, but I don't mean that in sort of a new agey way. I mean that in the sense it's a sacrament almost. This illusion of separation, because it's precisely the illusion of separation that feels so real, that allows all of this uniting and choosing to unite happen. Now, as soon as the veil of forgetting is sort of drawn between the conscious mind and unconscious mind, what might be the very first reaction? I'm talking instinctual, primal reaction for humans, both individually and collectively. Well, usually it's fear. And it's a primal fear due to our fundamental perception of being exiled, cut off, and separate from source. You know, we fear that we don't belong. We fear for our survival. We fear that we don't matter. And we fear that there is no purpose. And most people that you talk about will never be able to admit that immediately. But if you dig with people way down at the bottom of their pain, you'll find at the recesses of all of this, just above this veil of forgetting, just right there, that layer, it's a primal fear that, my God, I somehow know we're one with everything, but my experience is so separate. Therefore, there must be a reason why my experience is so not one. What would that be? Maybe I did something. Maybe I don't deserve this oneness. You know, these are primal things, and we can see these being played out in the things like Genesis, the Garden of Eden.
Mm-hmm.
It is an archetypal story that tries to capture uh, the need to go out of the Garden of Eden to explore. But notice what happens when Eve and Adam eat the apple. Nothing immediately happens in the biblical narrative. It's like, hey, this is pretty good. I don't know why God said not to eat this apple because this is pretty tasty. But then, as soon as they become aware that God is walking through the garden, you immediately see Eve and Adam being fearful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's trying to capture this sense of, uh-oh, I'm about to be punished. We are not punished. That's what it feels like on this side of the veil.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is that we're all invited into a movement outside of our old ways of being and thrust into liminal space. That is part of God's nature. Is, remember, this chaos and then the focusing, and you can't have the focusing of awareness without contrast. So God thrusts us out, but that creates fear. We're fearful that we did something that we deserve punishment.
Yeah, I'm reminded, Doug, as you were talking about since the fall, they broke the law that one rule God set in the garden, and they broke it. And since the fall, and their eyes opened, and then suddenly they can tell right from wrong, good from bad. So they become God to themselves, in that sense, so to speak. So yeah, fear creep in, and they were in the union and the oneness with God before that, right?
But here's what I want to add to that. The notion that we were one with God and then we did something to deserve to not be with God, that is a Christian notion that Augustine particularly was trying to state as a way to uh, correct or solve a problem that was arising at the time when he was writing. He was trying to come up with a way to fix a problem. I can't remember exactly what he was trying to resolve, but a deeper and more ancient understanding of this fall is more alike the very nature of humanity to learn how to become one with God needs to have the fall. In other words, if I could move forward into the Christian scriptures, we have Judas, and Judas being one who was tempted to betray Jesus, betrays Jesus, and then that galvanizes and sort of potentiates what happens later, and then it becomes, crucifixion and resurrection. But without Judas saying yes to that temptation, none of that would have happened. So then one wants to say, well, wait a minute, maybe this whole divine play that's happening, that there's not necessarily any bad figures and good figures. God is in control all the way. And we humans, with our little human capacities, are trying to make sense of this divine play that is uber macro, like super big, but we only live a certain amount of decades, and we can't see the forest because we grow up next to one tree in one part of the forest.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to say that the fall, we might say that it is a fall, but it's the fall that could be seen as what happens to the seed falling from the tree. That in order for the tree to reproduce, in order for life to happen, there has to be the falling of the acorn into the earth. The acorn finally has to say goodbye. And I think that that's what the Genesis story is trying to say here. Now, I know that there's other interpretations, but I'm giving you what feels to me to be congruent with
Right.
kind of what we've been talking about.
Yes, Doug, I also, as you were talking about, I feel like Genesis also is an introduction to Christ, to who
Yeah.
Jesus came later on, as a true human being. And that was
Yes.
embedded in there.
In
And
fact, we could even say that if Adam
mhm,
is, we're taught that Jesus is the new Adam.
yes.
Okay, so one way we might understand that is when Adam and Eve begin their journey, that they fall from the acorn, the tree. They're the acorn that falls, which they have to fall. Uh, Being one with the tree, the acorn is one with the tree, is all fine and dandy, but that doesn't mean the acorn's ever going to grow. So the acorn and all the circumstances that get the acorn to finally move down, fall, hit the ground, as soon as that happens, and then the awareness of being naked and fearful and naked, when wholeness comes, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, wholeness as God comes walking through the garden, and like, timbling and shameful. Well, exactly in that moment, as I said earlier, something begins to exist in the future that will be the consummation, the the gestalt, the wholeness where this trajectory is going. Just like where you began to have this awareness that you wanted to do something for the world, and immediately something appeared in your deep mind of an end goal that oriented all of your actions, your yeses, and
Mhm,
then finally culminated, huh?
yes.
That when Adam and Eve had this awareness of, oh my gosh, we have free will, and we get our likeness now needs to match our image. When that happened, uh, the human collective also began to have this orientation. We call that Christ. We call that Jesus Christ, the new
Mhm,
Adam.
mhm,
So throughout human history, then there's been this trajectory: 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, falling and rising, getting it, losing it, getting it. And then finally, we have the Jesus Christ event. And the Jesus Christ event then is this is humanity come to a new level of understanding that we are more than our primal instincts. We are more than our desires for power, prestige, and possessions. What we are is we are creation come to the level of awareness where we choose, not because we have to, because of an instinct, but we choose to connect and love from the heart center.
mhm.
And love is a choice at this point. And that's when everything starts to come together. But we needed a seed that was planted as soon as Adam and Eve left the garden. We need a seed that was planted and that we're growing towards. And that's that's the new Adam.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we can I'm getting a little off, but I just want to say that the
Mhm.
next layer of the skin, I call it the skin of primal suffering. So we have fear, and the next layer is sadness and shame. And borrowing from Brene Brown's work, maybe some of us know this. She talks about shame. She defines shame as the uh, very intensely uncomfortable feeling of being unworthy of love and belonging. So when I'm meeting with people, clients, especially men, and they're angry, I know automatically that below their anger is a shame that they don't feel worthy of love and belonging, maybe from their family of origin. Hmm? And hurt people hurt people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What we don't see ends up being transmitted by us.
Mm.
Yeah. Whatever crosses and crucifixions we're on, if we don't acknowledge them, we're just going to go and crucify everybody else to the same pain where we don't see ourselves on.
Exactly.
And usually it's shame. You're not worthy. You're not worthy, and you have to prove your worthiness. And below that is fear. But shame is something that everybody also has. And usually we don't want to go there because that means I have to be vulnerable. That means I have to look at the pain that I'd rather forget. I don't want to even think about those things. Or maybe I'll just say, yeah, it happened, whatever. But it is what it is. You just kind of go on. Those aren't necessarily helpful, because if we don't acknowledge and forgive, then that stays there as a seed of anxiety, as a seed of depression. So the final layer of this skin of primal human suffering is anger and bellicosity. So it's this anger to our unconscious feelings of fear. I mean, what person wants to admit they're fearful and shameful? They don't. So we want to be able to have a tough skin, and we want to be able to, we feel anger. And yet what that results in is this term called bellicosity. And I really want to bring this back into common use, more so than it is now. Bellicosity means a warlike stance, that I'm looking for something to be wrong, and I'm looking to attack something. In counseling, we might call this counterphobic, where we're so fearful and we're so vulnerable, but instead of always kind of being angry, being fearful and kind of walking around this way, anger or bellicosity is to be aggressive and attack before being attacked. And it doesn't have to be an actual attack, but we have this worldview. And this is sort of what is behind conspiracy thinking. Conspiracy thinking is having a worldview that I believe that there's malicious intent hidden everywhere, and I'm going to go looking for the malicious intent, and I'm going to kill those who I believe are wanting to be, or evil and trying to bring me down. We need to get rid of the negative first before we can grow. That is all a worldview that's based in bellicosity, and it doesn't work. It hasn't worked, and it won't work. And here's what I would say to you is, in your experience as a mental health practitioner and a spiritual director, we are taught to, when somebody has a pain, or maybe they're anxious, and they hate the fact that they're anxious. They hate it. And they even talk about, like, I hate that I'm anxious. I wish I didn't have this.
Right.
We usually say, if you hate on something that you don't like, it just makes it bigger. How do you usually approach that when someone says, I hate the fact that I do this? What might be a way that you help them to deal?
When in this kind of scenario you were talking about, when we go through the emotions, experience, feelings, sensations, emotions, sometimes we like label them, or even put above the feeling, put a label to shame ourselves. I shouldn't feel this way, So I would say, our work is how, those feelings, shame, anger or sadness are normal human experience, right? We all experience them. But it's not necessarily bad when you were talking about, but how can we transform, to me, is how we can transform those energy from, you can say, negative energy. People don't feel good, sad, depressed, anxious, to an energy that actually serve them, and
Mm.
help them to reach to their goal, as you were talking about a goal. If I'm sad, I'm depressed, I cannot get out of bed, I cannot, function properly. But what do you want? What kind of life do you want? If that kind of life force, that energy is what you want, how can we transform from this negative energy to that positive energy so we can move forward, right?
Well, that's exactly what I agree with too, and I'm glad you said it that way. You said it very well. What I hear you saying, the underlying principle is all of these human emotions are fine. We don't need to say they're bad or good. They're human. They belong. Why? Because they're part of the human thing. And
Yes.
that's the point, is when I and have this an anxious feeling that it feels uncomfortable, let's say.
Mhm, mhm.
Uh if I try to just say, God, I hate the fact that I feel this way. Well, that actually, it's like gasoline on a fire, and it makes it bigger. Uh, and then it becomes a focus where I just hate the fact that I'm feeling this way. And then I hate the fact that I'm feeling this way times two, then times, you see, it just keeps growing.
Mhm.
Instead, what I hear you saying is switch and have an approach that is of hospitality.
Bingo. I agree. As an invitation, as you were talking
Mm,
about, I'm reminded of Martha and Mary.
yeah,
Martha was anxious, busy, busy, busy. But from Martha's role, I'm just use this as an example to be transformed, to move from one state to anxious state to like a Mary in the peaceful state, right? So the anxious might be a warning sign, might be alarm, might be a reminder what's going on inside of me. Oh, maybe I need to take time and do what a Mary does.
right. But if I'm hating on my anxiousness, I'm never going to get to that awareness that you just said.
Mm,
So the first thing to do is to help people understand that they are feeling anxious, because maybe they're just so used to it they don't even know that they're feeling it.
yeah.
And once they become aware of that contrast, that anxious contrast they don't want anymore, then it's either you hate it, and I'm just going to hate that I'm anxious and then hate everybody that made me anxious. That's
Mm-hmm.
bellicosity, by the way, and that is the biggest problem I think humans have. That's our great sin, is this sin of bellicosity. But instead, what I hear you saying is, uh, it is an invitation. It is a catalyst, neither bad or good. It's the feeling of anxiety, say, is a catalyst that allows me to say, wow, I'm feeling this. What might it mean to me? But before to even ask, what's your message, anxiety, we have to allow it to come in. We give it a place at the banquet table of our heart. Yet you create a sacred space inside of you where you invite. It's like having a family member that you don't necessarily love having around, but you know what? They're blood. They're with you, and you're going to invite them in anyways. Just put them in the corner.
Right. So Doug, as you were talking about, there's a term called relationship anxiety. Have you heard
Mm,
that term, relationship
yeah,
anxiety? Since we're talking about relationship, right?
yeah.
So when the anxiety generates in us, uh, how we deal with the relationship. Many times we deal with relationship like a Martha. We complaining, we blame another person. I feel anxious because you did a XYZ, right? That's what you were talking about earlier.
Hmm. And then what I hear you saying is, if I'm feeling anxious because you did X, Y, and Z, and then I end up, if I that there's a decision there, because then I'm wanting to react to that inside of me, and I'm just going to be I'm going to build resentment. I'm going to
Yeah.
grow resentment in me, and then that's going to grow up out of the soil of my resentment and become passive aggressive or whatever, silence, or perpetual silence, whatever. Instead, I feel anxious. I hold it as actually sacred, holy, in the sense of being whole. It's a part of it. It's something I'm feeling inside. I'm going to bring it into the banquet of my heart, there's a big a universal table set, invite it in. And then what I tell people to do is when you invite that anger or whatever it is inside of you, you automatically have, I don't mean this in a manipulative way, but you actually have agency over that feeling now. Because if I'm inviting anger inside of me, I'm not doing it in like a masochistic way. I'm actually saying, I'm human. This is a part of the human condition. I'm bringing it inside. And then what I ask people to do, and I do it myself, is immediately right there, I put myself in the place of like I put myself next to Jesus at the banquet table. We have anger over here, we have depression over here, we have loneliness, we have joy. Uh-oh, that's okay. I don't need that right now. We have all of these different emotions that are right there. But let's say my biggest emotion I'm feeling right now is anxiety, just to pick one. What I do is I put myself right next to Jesus in my heart. And then Jesus, on the Last Supper, you see him taking the bread and raising the bread and blessing it. What I do is I ask Jesus, I'm sitting with Jesus in the banquet of my heart, and he's going to take the anger that I've invited in, and he's going to hold it here, and then he's going to raise it as a blessing for the whole world. And here's how I call this the sacrament of solidarity. And what this is in that moment when I'm feeling anxious and I don't like it, I invite it in, and then I think about all of the people right now in this world, this 8.3 billion people. How many of us humans are feeling anxious right now? How many of us are feeling anxious about a relationship or something right now? And I tell you what really is therapeutic, and you know this, is solidarity. When you know somebody gets you, you don't need to be fixed. You don't need to be told what to do. You're not looking for any of that. What you're looking for is someone to say, hey, sister, I'm right with you. I get it. I'm in it with you. Arm in arm, I'm sitting in the pit with you. Huh? And so that's what we can give that energy, so, precisely because we're feeling the pain. But so is a lot of other people. So we raise it. Jesus takes this and raises it up. And I'm picturing all of these people in the world that might be feeling anxious right now. Gaza, people in Ukraine, in Russia, and all the places, Africa, all the places that people are hurting. And I say out sometimes out loud, but certainly inside, I say, I see you, all of you. I'm with you. And I love you. And I wish you well-being. I wish you peace. I wish you joy. And just the pronouncement of these things, it's like the epicenter of my own anxiety was suddenly transformed into a new big bang of love and light that ushers and gushes forth from the very scars of my crucifixion and out into the world. Now, it's not me, it's Christ doing this through me. But my yes is to bring the anger in, to let Christ hold it. And then my yes is to picture everybody, and then to desire to bless everybody. And it's Christ doing it in through me. And the way it feels inside is what was so intense 10 seconds ago actually gets transformed into this weird explosion of love.
Yes. So, like the energy, anxiety, and the excitement, the energy inside of us is the same, though we feel differently. You are saying the anger or the burst compelling love. They're both strong energy, but it's the same energy inside of us, so we feel differently.
And what is it, the way it's converted is our capacity to our decision, that the gift that we are given in the chaos of this raw energy. That's chaos. Remember the focusing principle of the conscious awareness principle of God the Father?
Mm-hmm.
Here's chaos. God the Father is asking us at that point, what do you want to do with this energy? Now,
Yeah.
most of us aren't even aware of that we're being asked that, but that is precisely what we're being asked. In that moment, God is saying, okay, you got some raw power here. What do you want to do with it?
Exactly. I'm reminded like the pendulum. Pendulum, when we swing to one extreme, then we experience all the chaos you mentioned about, the tension. Then we seek to the another end of the pendulum, swing back to all the love, peace, joy. The life is just like a back and forth and back and forth. You know, we as humans, we experience fully all the emotions and feelings, including good ones, bad ones. But how can we reconcile them, balance them, knowing how to transform from one form to another form? I think it's kind of like art. It's like
That's our
putting
creation.
the work like an art.
That's the creative principle. You've just named the creative principle. The holding, that is Christ, that is the logos, that is the Son. Holding the opposites, because if you're feeling intensely angry at that moment,
Mhm.
then and if that's an actualized thing, like it's something that exists inside of me or you in that moment. What is also true but not acknowledged is the exact opposite of intensity, but is to the degree that I'm angry is also to the degree that I can feel delight, joy, all of that. And it's potentiated, but it's not actualized. In other words, it is there,
Mhm.
but if my focus is on the anger, then I'm never going to be able to release this. And the way that I think we release this, because I can't, we're not, um, it's not our human nature. We're not supposed to be able just to feel the anger and then automatically just switch and feel delight. The reason why is because that wouldn't help us grow.
Mm.
What we have to do is we feel the anger intensely, and then we have to say, yes, I trust, I have faith that delight and joy is here too. Now, I may not believe it, but there's some part of me that says it's got to be here. And so then what happens is we use our very scars, our hurt, to bless the world. Now, that's hard to do. But if I can bless the world through my pain, or if somebody just hurt me, I have to be able to say, they forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. There's techniques on how to do this. But when we do that, we're bringing in from potentiation delight and joy of wholeness. We're bringing that into actualization.
Mm. Actualization, I think I'm mindful of our time today, but this is such a
Yeah.
wonderful discussion with you, Doug. And I just want to end, as we come to the end of this section,
Yeah.
such a beautifully dynamic described by you, that we feel those feelings, emotions we were talking about, they are real. When people are suffering, they feel pain, hurt, sad, and those are all real. But you also pinpoint that there's a great reality in the present moment, and that is available for love, joy, peace, right? So it's up to us. It's like, the two sides of the coin. We experience the darkness, and the turnaround, there's a light on another side. Um,
And once you've died and risen enough times in your life, you can trust that the place where you will lay your head is in liminal space. So we don't trust the old rooms like everything is stable and fine. Be grateful for it, but don't make that your home. And then, because you're going to be thrust out. And then when we live into our new rooms of like joy and delight, well, we can be grateful for it, but let's not trust it as our permanent home, because that's going to be the new room becomes like a new old room. Eventually that becomes status quo.
mm,
And so you might as well just learn how to live in liminal space and not be attached to the pain or the joy, but just be grateful for it all. Now that takes a long time. and a lot of living and being guided well. But I think that's the goal, isn't it?
Yeah, so beautifully said. I remember you mentioned about the seeds of hope and the flower of joy. You know, it's a journey, and I'm so grateful this journey never ends, you know, just by today or tomorrow on earth. This journey is a forever journey.
Amen. Love it.
Yeah.
Well, let's continue this talk next time, and we'll just keep digging deeper and having these magical moments here. And I'm grateful for you and grateful for God to be in this, in our dialogos, our dialogue.
Wonderful. Thank you, Doug, so much. This is such a delightful conversation with you. I'm looking forward to our third section.